we're our own home building company. The day we plugged up our email system to the internet was a game changer. And I think you're going to see the same thing kind of happen with blockchain, especially enterprise blockchain technology. And so I look at, probably cryptocurrency as even counterproductive for legitimizing how blockchain can contribute to business use cases, and even cryptocurrency can too. But there's so much flash and guys with big chain. There's too much glamour stuff around it. So because there's very very legitimate and serious use cases for blockchain as a technology, and uniquely, this ability to have an immutable ledger that crosses organizational boundaries. And construction happens to be, I think, probably one of the best, if not the best, use case scenario, because I compare it to like supply chain. Well, we might have 5 or 6 organizations involved in a single package shipping overseas, and it provides this single record, single source of the truth for that package as it crosses through 5 or 6 different hands. Well, on a construction project, that could be 50 organizations involved in a single project. It could be 100 organizations involved in a single project. And there is no common ledger. There is no single source of the truth that serves across organizational boundaries. And I think when that gets fully realized and fully leveraged, it's going to be a big game changer. I think all this with the internet, I mean, we could send invoices from one company to the other, but it didn't eliminate reconciliation and disputes. And, everybody had their own data silo, right? Everybody had their own, the vendor's record show this and the general contractor's record shows that. You still had the reconciliation and dispute scenario, whether the internet was there or not. Well, I think with blockchain, that's going to go away. And that's where a lot of the friction and a lot of the productivity gains are going to be realized.
Absolutely. So to the topic, kind of middlemen, it was pretty interesting that the FBI got their hands on the keys of the ransomware.
Test.
Kind of speak to the whole middleman. I mean, maybe I missed something, but to me, that seemed to be a significant milestone. I'm assuming those keys were held by a custodian, because if they were kind of cold, the FBI would not have been able to get those keys. So, anybody know more details on how that all went down? Because I think it's about middlemen, right? It's about
I think you're right.
that had to respond to a court order to turn over the keys.
And there must have been a custodian in the middle. I thought the same thing, Kurt. I don't know what the answer was or how it happened, but I had to think, well, they must have used an exchange, because if it was done, in a fashion where somebody was storing their keys offline, I don't know how the FBI would have ever been able to crack it. It's, Bitcoin has never been cracked because it's too, proof of work does burn a lot of energy, but it does also make it very uncrackable.
Yeah.
So there must have been a custodian that must have, and you would think the party receiving the funds would have been aware of that, but I don't know.
This is not
It'll
just
be
the first time. This is not the first time that FBI has figured out a way to track down people who were being bad actors on the platform. I forget where I saw this, but it was, I think Netflix had actually a documentary about that. Melvin, do you remember most of the history of that?
They've tracked them down, right? The Silk Road and stuff like that. But as far as actually getting their hands on the keys, Like maybe that's the thing that I hadn't seen. So curious.
Yeah, no, several thoughts going through my mind, but I would say for the non-conspiracy piece of it, uh, accurate and more than likely scenario that there was some custodian involved, or even if there was not a custodian involved, and say they were using one of those wallets that you can download, and maybe they didn't know that, however they were backing up the key to uh, the site that maintains the wallet could be decrypted by the FBI. That could be another way where they thought they were using something private that wasn't custodial, but just the act of backing up the mnemonic and so on and so forth to whatever servers and infrastructure that wallet provides also puts you at risk, because I know from experience that we structured our servers and things like that for that very scenario, that different governments might want to come and get access to their constituents, financial information, and we would be obliged to give it. And so one of the pieces in passing that audit was making sure that we had, different regions and different cryptographic keys organized for the regional databases that we were storing that information. And then Don, I think this is Melvin again. Just to address, Kurt's point, I just wanted to recap the topic of last week when we said, middlemen aren't dead, and in any other, setting that would be like a no-brainer, right? But one of the biggest hype pieces in the whole blockchain space, even from the start, was this idea of a utopic, vision where you wouldn't need middlemen at all, and you'd have this completely trustless, framework that disintermediates all institutions, right? Um, and I don't think that was necessarily what they were attempting to convey, or it might have just been part of the marketing hype to get people excited. But in any deep analysis of how people work and play and of just technology itself, we started to discuss the idea that there's no such thing as non-human assisted technology, and all technology is human assisted because it's made by humans for humans. So just wanted to,
Yeah.
just kind of recap that piece of it.
Well, let me jump in here real quick, Melvin. I think you're exactly right. As long as a middleman provides value, like credentialing, there's still got to be a verification process, and a certain amount of that's going to be automated. But there's always going to be this, I think, need to have a human stamp its credibility. That there's somebody behind the credentialing process instead of just a abstracted computer process. And I remember even back in the mid 90s when the internet was happening, it was commonly quoted there was going to be this tremendous disintermediation of all these middlemen and wholesalers and distributors and everything, and it didn't happen uh, because there was still a lot of value being created, and the internet did not uh,
No,
address that
it
that
gave us the
value.
biggest.
But you're exactly right. Now, what I do think will happen though this time around is people that aren't creating value but are collecting money just by being in a position, which I'm going to say banks are like that, but banks are kind of like that, where they're not really creating that much business value besides just moving funds around. Then I think we will see some disintermediation around this time, but I could be wrong, but I think it may be only a 10 or 20% impact, and still 80% will be there, delivering some kind of unique value that these people have provided in the past or a modern way in the future.
And if nothing else done, I think, especially in the case of banks, right, it it will draw out the real value of what the banks have been providing all along. So it kind of will force them to show where the value is that they provide, and maybe you have to share that more, right? Like there's a reason why you're hiding, right? Is because you're able to do a whole lot more with the resources that people entrust you with than they know what to do with themselves. And so like we're seeing a big conversion into, the kind of the self awareness and um, um, uh, self ability, right, through these robo advisors and things like that, to invest in markets, invest in um, and ideas and things and so forth, and be able to connect those financial infrastructures in a way that feels like point and click and plug and play. So that's huge, and that's putting ever since Simple Bank, right? Before this blockchain stuff came out, that has been putting pressure on banks to improve their interfaces and to do things that show more value to their customers. And so I think that's
Right. I think exactly. And is that any different than how capitalism has always evolved ever since the invention of the steam engine, and moving forward? So there's always been this having to evaluate the value proposition based on how the landscape has changed out in front of you, and it's almost always technology driven, because even the steam engine before that was not, and then electricity and going forward. This is probably not anything new now. I do think this is going to be kind of a hyper steroid change, and things are going to change much more drastically. I do believe there's a logarithmic curve to this stuff, and we're not on the flat side of the curve anymore. We're getting closer to the sharp bend upward where it looks almost vertical.
what was interesting is that in 2019 blockchain was dead. I don't know if you guys caught that, but it died, and they said, "Oh, it's flat. There's no more investment or innovation in this."
Same thing happened in the year 2000 with the internet. It was dead.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
It really is. I think they may have been wrong about that. Just speculating here.
Brittany, you had something to add from a comment that we got.
Can you guys hear me? Looks like it's coming through. My little face is lighting up. Yeah, so we've been getting some commentary. It was a little bit ago when we were talking about how Bitcoin blockchain had not been crackable. Christopher Churchill, PMP, said it is crackable. Look back to when Google announced its accomplishments in quantum computing 2019. On that day, there was a huge precipitous drop in cryptos. Quantum computing is here. So I just thought it was an interesting comment, given the quantum computing trajectory. I'm curious as to others in response to that comment.
Well, I've had this conversation, Brittany, and I guess there's no such thing as something's impossible, right? But I think there's an economic equation that has to enter it, because when it costs more money to crack the code than the transaction's worth, then the use of ceases to be practical, even though it is in theory possible. So and so if somebody's making uh, but if somebody's trying to crack a $1,500 transaction, at least for now and at least the next 5 or 10 years, I gotta think it's not economically feasible, even though in theory it's possible. But I don't have any real stats or studies behind that. But I do know there's an economic, you know, diminishing return scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a great another point that someone pointed out to me a while back is even if you have the power to do it, once you do it, everybody knows that you have the power to do it. So you probably don't want to do that in such a public way. You might go for other targets, right? That get you access to the same information, just not by hacking the Bitcoin protocol itself.
Yeah, and let's say there's a $10 million transaction. Well, you just send out, 50 transactions at like that. So you break it down where each transaction is small enough that it's not economically feasible at a lower rate. So even if you get up to a $10 million transaction and it looks like it might be worth cracking it, you just start transferring the funds in smaller amounts. So it's almost like warfare. There's counter, and so there's this constant battle between strategy and counter strategy, right? And and I think people will figure it out. You know what I mean? And like I said, it's not like regular money isn't vulnerable too. I mean, there's no such thing as perfection, including including fiat currency isn't perfect either. So people they had to worry about people using copying machines to copy it. So yeah, everything's relative to what's its alternative.
Yeah, and just again, a good point of recap is why we introduced the whole concept of middlemen aren't dead is because you need some subjectivity in the process for instances where hard, um, let's just say, really rigid processes don't account for say the humanity that's involved in rectifying a situation. So we were talking about it as the word insurance, right? And this is a perfect example of such. If you do get hacked, right, and you most likely will some way, somehow, even if it's not by a quantum computer, where's your protection in that case, right? Even when you buy a brand, and I gave the examples of like the Model T and my brand new Subaru, which is supposed to be a safe car, and all these things, and uh, it went to the shop twice last week, and I just got it back this week today. So we were talking about the difference between having that Model T and having the Subaru. Is I had to know how to fix that Model T myself, and even though it's the same concept, same technology, four wheels, steering wheel, move fast on the road, and gets me from point A to point B, hopefully reliably. Now, if something goes wrong with my vehicle, I have a tow truck that'll come and get it. They'll probably bring over another car for me to a loaner to drive in the meantime, and obviously I pay an extra premium for that service, but that insurance policy. And so we were saying that if not just for the simple fact that we're doing more and more of these tightly coupled, very rigid types of logical transactions, you're going to need insurance of some sort, right, to cover